The galaxy had never truly taken humanity seriously, a fact that the members of the Dravari High Council found amusing as they prepared their armada for what they assumed would be a simple demonstration of dominance over a primitive species. From their crystalline flagship orbiting the binary system of Zalera, the Council watched the communications feed with smug satisfaction as the first reconnaissance ships entered human-controlled space, fully expecting to encounter disorganized colonies and poorly armed fleets. Humans, as they had long concluded, were unpredictable but ultimately weak, and their technologies were quaint, relics compared to the energy weapons and graviton manipulators wielded by the Dravari. On Earth, however, preparations were underway that the Council could not have imagined as scientists, engineers, and military strategists collaborated on a scale that rivaled the combined efforts of the Dravari Armada itself, harnessing decades of covert development and strategic planning designed to exploit the arrogance of every alien species that dared to mock humanity. Captain Jonathan Hayes of the United Earth Space Command Fleet convened his senior officers in the command center of the orbital station above Mars, where holographic displays depicted the incoming alien formations in precise detail, their trajectories, shield frequencies, and likely engagement strategies analyzed with an intensity born of centuries of preparation for exactly this moment. "They believe we are simple," Hayes said, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority earned through years of interstellar training. "And that is our advantage. Every assumption they make about our capabilities is a weakness we will exploit. Every miscalculation they count on will be a step toward their destruction." Engineers adjusted the polariton emitters and phase plasma cannons, while scientists verified the harmonics of quantum entangled communication relays that allowed instantaneous coordination across multiple fleets, something no alien technology had yet managed to replicate without latency or signal degradation. Meanwhile, on the surface of the planet, humanity's orbital defense arrays and stealth capital ships were moving into position, cloaked against detection, their outlines invisible to the sophisticated sensor networks of the Dravari. The alien armada entered the system with confident aggression, believing they were about to overwhelm a primitive species, only to find that their initial scans revealed nothing, their sensors bouncing off false echoes and ghost signals, while humans observed from hidden vantage points, tracking every movement and ready to strike with precision that seemed impossible given their reputation. Communications from the Dravari flagship were brimming with condescension, mocking the humans for what they called expectedly disorganized resistance, unaware that the messages themselves were feeding into a larger strategy, baiting them into predictable maneuvers that the human commanders had anticipated and mapped in simulations thousands of times over. Lieutenant Sarah Kincaid, head of tactical operations, watched as the alien vessels adjusted their formations in response to the decoy signals, their overconfidence blinding them to the real threats that lurked just outside their sensors, while human fighters and stealth drones moved into optimal strike positions. The first engagement occurred at the asteroid belt on the outer edge of the system, where humans detonated synchronized gravitic pulses that disrupted alien shield harmonics, causing cascading failures across multiple cruisers simultaneously, something no alien engineer could have predicted. And within moments, the Dravari experienced the first shock of a conflict they assumed would be trivial. Captain Hayes' voice resonated over secure channels. "This is the moment we prepared for. Execute Plan Omega. Remember everything we've drilled. Precision and patience when battles no alien arrogance can anticipate." The human fleet moved like a single organism, capital ships firing coordinated volleys, while smaller craft executed evasive maneuvers with agility that dwarfed the cumbersome alien vessels, and each strike exploited weaknesses the aliens had not even realized existed. Entire wings of alien ships were caught in gravitational traps, their engines overloaded by electromagnetic pulses calibrated to resonate with their specific power cores, and humans, anticipating each countermeasure, had already set contingencies in motion, redirecting firepower, isolating ships, and neutralizing threats with surgical efficiency. Communication relays allowed instantaneous tactical updates, with every captain responding in real time to events unfolding across thousands of kilometers of space, and alien attempts to retreat or regroup were anticipated, countered, and neutralized before they could materialize, creating the terrifying realization among the Dravari that the humans were not just defending, they were orchestrating the battlefield itself. As the engagement intensified, the aliens began to comprehend that what they had assumed were primitive, Underdeveloped tactics were in fact a result of centuries of covert study of galactic warfare, combined with innovations in technology that far surpassed anything the Dravari had encountered, and panic began to ripple through their ranks as the first ships were destroyed with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Even the Council itself, watching remotely, felt a disquieting sense of disbelief, the initial amusement giving way to dread as their forces were picked apart, decimated in ways that exposed both strategic and technological superiority of humans, and the very arrogance that led them to underestimate Earth and its colonies became the mechanism of their undoing. Humanity had turned every insult, every slight, every act of dismissal into fuel for an overwhelming demonstration of intelligence, discipline, and martial coordination, revealing that their perceived weakness was a carefully maintained illusion, and the full scale of the human offensive was only beginning to be realized as hidden fleets emerged from cloaked positions to encircle the alien Armada, cutting off escape routes and forcing engagements on human terms. As lasers, missiles, and energy beams tore through alien hulls and systems, the Dravari learned that humans had not just anticipated their every move. They had manipulated them, setting traps that exploited cultural arrogance, predicting overconfidence in every maneuver, and now, under a sky filled with burning alien vessels, the galaxy witnessed for the first time that humanity, long underestimated and scorned, had evolved into a tactical and technological juggernaut capable of outwitting an entire armada. The Council attempted to send orders to regroup, but those messages were already intercepted and rerouted by quantum encryption systems, ensuring that the humans maintained complete control over the flow of information, while human forces exploited every vulnerability, turning alien strengths into weaknesses with ruthless efficiency. Civilian colonies previously dismissed as irrelevant became active components of the defense network, their orbital platforms and improvised weapons contributing to a layered offense that confounded alien intelligence, and human pilots displayed daring maneuvers that were impossible to predict, combining instinct with trained precision in a way that turned the tide at multiple points simultaneously. Entire sectors of space that the Dravari assumed were under their complete observational dominance became zones of confusion and ambush, with humans using sensor ghosts, simulated fleets, and feints to draw ships into kill zones, demonstrating not just military might, but strategic artistry that was invisible until it was too late. As hours turned into days, the scale of human preparation became apparent even to the most skeptical observers, and the Armada, once confident of victory, was now fragmented, demoralized, and aware that they were facing an enemy who had planned not just for battle, but for the psychological dismantling of their command structure, with humans exploiting fear, confusion, and arrogance to devastating effect. By the time the first full-scale assault on the central fleet of the Dravari was launched, the humans had already reduced the alien operational capability by a significant fraction, proving that they could outmaneuver, outthink, and outgun a force that was considered insurmountable, and the Council, witnessing collapse of their meticulously constructed plans, began to understand the catastrophic error of underestimating the very species they had mocked for centuries, a species that had quietly transformed itself into the most formidable power the galaxy had ever encountered. Humanity's tactics combined brute force with cunning deception, and every loss inflicted upon the Dravari revealed the depth of planning that had gone into this confrontation, leaving no doubt that the humans had mastered both the art and science of interstellar warfare, capable of turning even the most hopeless situations into opportunities for decisive advantage. And as the smoke of destroyed alien vessels drifted through the void, the Council finally comprehended the truth. They had not faced an opponent. They had awakened a force beyond their imagination, a force that would not be stopped by arrogance, complacency, or underestimation, and the first seeds of fear were planted in the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful, who now realized that humanity, long dismissed as weak and irrelevant, had outwitted an entire alien armada, and the implications of this revelation would reverberate across every star system for decades to come. The aftermath of the initial ambush left the Dravari fleet in chaos, shattered formations drifting through the void as surviving vessels attempted to regroup under the panic command of Admiral Krellin, who had never imagined that humans could orchestrate such precise and devastating counterattack, and as the alien crew scrambled to repair shields and re-establish communications, they found that every move they made had already been anticipated and neutralized by the human forces positioned strategically across multiple sectors, hidden behind cloaked warships and orbital platforms, while back on Earth, President Daniel Morrison convened a council of scientists, generals, and diplomats to coordinate the next phase of the human offensive, emphasizing that the success of the initial strike was only the beginning and that every alien assumption about human limitations would be systematically exploited, ensuring that the galaxy would never again mistake humanity for a primitive or secondary power. As Lieutenant Commander Elena Ortiz analyzed incoming telemetry and confirmed that the alien Armada was attempting a series of feints toward known human supply lines, only to be funneled into prearranged kill zones where automated defense turrets and stealth fighter wings awaited, their synchronized attacks designed to disrupt both alien morale and ship integrity with unerring accuracy. And as the Dravari realized that even their most sophisticated sensors could not detect human preparations, fear began to spread among the ranks, replacing the confidence that had carried them into human space with a paralyzing doubt, while Captain Hayes coordinated simultaneous strikes on multiple fronts, using real-time quantum communication to adjust tactics instantaneously and exploit any weakness the aliens exposed, ensuring that every human unit, from the smallest fighter squadron to the largest capital ship, acted with unified purpose and unparalleled precision, and at the same time, specialized human engineers executed targeted electronic warfare that interfered with alien targeting systems, scrambling weapon calibration, and rendering many of their energy beams and missile volleys ineffective, while human ships countered with deadly accuracy, neutralizing threats before the Dravari could comprehend the full scale of their vulnerability. And in the midst of this battle, the humans also deployed decoy fleets that mimicked the appearance of retreat, luring alien ships into gravitational traps and energy nets that tore through hulls and disabled engines, leaving crews stranded in the cold emptiness of space, utterly at the mercy of their human adversaries, who continued to exploit every mistake with clinical efficiency, demonstrating an understanding of alien psychology that went beyond tactics and into the realm of strategic manipulation. As humans anticipated that arrogance would lead the aliens into predictable errors and then orchestrated each encounter to maximize both destruction and terror, sending a clear message that humanity's approach to warfare combined intellect, adaptability, and sheer force, and that underestimation would always be fatal. While across the galaxy, intelligence networks began to report anomalies that suggested Earth had amassed fleets far larger than previously known, and colonies in distant systems activated hidden military infrastructures that had remained dormant for decades, revealing humanity's long-term commitment to defending itself and its allies. And the Dravari, once confident of a swift victory, now faced a horrifying realization that humans had spent centuries preparing for exactly this scenario, and that every advantage they had counted on was being systematically stripped away, leaving them vulnerable not only to physical destruction, but to the psychological terror of being outmatched at every turn. While back on Earth, President Morrison watched the real-time feeds of the battle with solemn determination, knowing that each move was critical, that every ship, every fighter, every orbital battery contributed to a larger symphony of tactical brilliance, and that the survival of humanity depended on maintaining this relentless pressure, a pressure that would break alien morale and force them to comprehend, too late, that the species they had long mocked had evolved into a predator that no arrogance could blind. And as the conflict stretched across hundreds of kilometers of space, human pilots, scientists, and strategists worked in perfect synchronization, adapting to every alien maneuver, exploiting every weakness, and gradually turning the tide of battle in a display of ingenuity and courage that left even the most seasoned observers in disbelief, while messages intercepted from alien communications revealed confusion, fear, and the dawning awareness that they were not dealing with a mere primitive species, but with an opponent whose combination of strategy, technology, and psychological insight was rewriting the rules of galactic warfare. And as the hours dragged on, each human strike reinforced a lesson that underestimating humanity was a mistake that could not be undone, as fleets previously thought insignificant executed maneuvers that decimated alien command structures, destroyed critical supply lines, and established uncontested control over strategic sectors, demonstrating that human superiority was not accidental but the result of meticulous planning, unparalleled coordination, and a willingness to exploit every opportunity the aliens unknowingly provided. And by the end of the second day, the Dravari Armada was fragmented and demoralized, with surviving ships retreating toward distant sectors, only to discover the humans had anticipated those movements as well, establishing intercept points and ambushes that continued to dismantle their forces piece by piece, leaving the once proud alien commanders to comprehend that the humans they had ridiculed were no longer subordinate species, but a dominant force whose cunning, patience, and precision had outwitted an entire alien armada and set the stage for humanity's inevitable rise to galactic prominence. In the wake of their initial defeats, the Dravari Council convened an emergency session aboard their flagship, a massive crystalline structure orbiting the gas giant Vorin. And for the first time, debates erupted among the elders about the true nature of humanity, with some arguing that humans had simply caught the Armada off guard, while others began to voice the horrifying possibility that humans were operating on a level of strategic genius far beyond anything previously encountered. And while these arguments raged, Captain Hayes continued to orchestrate the human fleet with flawless precision, using real-time data feeds to anticipate alien movements, direct coordinated strikes, and exploit every weakness in the Dravari formations. And in sectors previously assumed to be secure, humans deployed cloaked carriers that unleashed swarms of agile fighters, each programmed to operate independently yet in perfect harmony with the rest of the fleet. And as these attacks struck the flanks of alien battle groups, entire cruisers were disabled before they could mount effective resistance, their engines overloaded and shields collapsing under attacks designed to exploit the exact harmonic frequencies of their power cores. And while this destruction unfolded, the human command structure remained calm, analyzing losses, reallocating resources, and issuing orders that ensured the continuous momentum of the offensive. And in orbital stations around Earth, engineers monitored quantum relays and energy grid outputs, ready to adjust weapon systems and fleet movements in milliseconds, while scientists observed alien behavioral patterns, predicting reactions with accuracy that bordered on clairvoyance. And on distant human colonies, defense networks previously dormant were activated, deploying additional fleets, orbital cannons, and planetary shields that added layers of complexity to the battlefield, confusing the Dravari and forcing them to confront a universe that no longer conformed to their expectations. While back in the midst of combat, human fighter squadrons executed hit-and-run tactics with astonishing precision, striking key alien vessels and disappearing before counterfire could be effectively aimed, drawing alien fleets into ambushes where orbital batteries and capital ships waited to deliver devastating volleys. And as the battle spread across multiple star systems, communication disruptions orchestrated by human cyber warfare teams crippled the alien network, isolating units and forcing commanders to make split-second decisions with incomplete data, while human forces anticipated every possible scenario and adjusted in real time, ensuring that the momentum remained entirely on their side. And each encounter further eroded alien morale, creating fear and confusion that humans use as a weapon just as lethal as any cannon or missile. And while these tactical victories accumulated, strategic operations continued, with human intelligence identifying critical supply routes and resource hubs for preemptive strikes, ensuring that the Dravari could not regroup or reinforce their forces. And simultaneously, covert teams aboard stealth ships infiltrated alien command centers, gathering real-time intelligence, planting false data, and manipulating communications to further disorient the enemy, creating the illusion of omnipresence and omniscience that amplified the psychological impact of every human maneuver. And as days turned into nights across the star systems, the humans maintained relentless pressure, exploiting every lapse, capitalizing on every error, and demonstrating a level of coordination, patience, and tactical ingenuity that the Dravari had never anticipated, proving that humanity's mastery of interstellar warfare was not only a product of advanced technology, but also the result of rigorous training, disciplined execution, and the collective ingenuity of a species long underestimated. And as the Dravari Armada continued to fragment under calculated onslaught, even their most hardened veterans began to fear the inevitability of defeat, acknowledging silently that they had underestimated humans not out of ignorance but out of arrogance, and that this arrogance had led them into a trap from which there was no escape. While on Earth, Captain Hayes and his command team monitored the broader implications of the offensive, understanding that the human demonstration of power would not only secure immediate survival, but would also send a clear warning to the entire galaxy, a warning that humanity could not be ignored, dismissed, or underestimated again. and that the species that had been mocked, scorned, and disregarded for centuries had transformed itself into a calculated, unstoppable force capable of dismantling even the most powerful armadas, rewriting the rules of engagement, and establishing humanity as a dominant power whose combination of strategic foresight, technological innovation, and psychological acuity had outwitted an entire alien armada and changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. As the conflict expanded into deeper sectors of human-controlled space, the Dravari forces found themselves increasingly ensnared by tactics that were both audacious and meticulously calculated, with human strategists using multi-tiered deception, diversionary fleets, and electromagnetic interference to manipulate the alien perception of the battlefield. And while the Dravari attempted to adapt, their attempt at countermeasures were repeatedly anticipated and nullified by the human command, who had studied alien fleet doctrines for decades and used that knowledge to construct scenarios that forced predictable behavior, while simultaneously creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited in real time. And at the same time, human engineers deployed experimental propulsion technologies and stealth capabilities that allowed capital ships to maneuver in ways the aliens had never considered possible, while quantum communication relays ensured instantaneous coordination between distant fleets, creating a network offensive that was far faster and more adaptive than any Dravari command system. And as alien morale deteriorated, the humans maintained relentless psychological pressure, projecting simulated reinforcements, feigned retreats, and false tactical data that forced the Dravari into defensive postures that left them vulnerable to precision strikes. While human fighter squadrons executed coordinated flanking maneuvers, exploiting gaps created by alien overconfidence and targeting command ships, supply vessels, and orbital defense stations in rapid succession, overwhelming enemy coordination, and forcing scattered fleets into isolation, making them easy prey for subsequent attacks. And within human intelligence centers, analysts process terabytes of combat data from multiple theaters, dynamically predicting alien movements, weapon outputs, and response patterns, while simultaneously integrating signals from stealth reconnaissance units and remote drone swarms, enabling the human forces to maintain a level of situational awareness that the Dravari could neither match nor counter. And as orbital bombardments and precision strikes dismantled critical alien infrastructure, human leaders orchestrated simultaneous humanitarian evacuations of affected colonies, showcasing that their approach to warfare combined ruthlessness against the enemy with calculated protection of their own populations, further amplifying alien confusion and disbelief. And as the Dravari attempted to launch a concentrated counterattack on human supply lines, they discovered that every possible escape route and reinforcement corridor had been mapped and preemptively secured or neutralized, leaving them exposed to converging assaults from multiple human divisions operating in perfect synchronization. And while alien engineers scrambled to repair systems damaged by electromagnetic and gravitational disruptions, human cyber units initiated countermeasures that overloaded their circuitry, spread false telemetry, and created cascading malfunctions that crippled weaponry, shields, and engines simultaneously. And as the human forces tightened their encirclement, psychological operations transmitted messages to alien crews, exploiting fear, doubt, and indecision, revealing that humanity's understanding of alien culture, command hierarchies, and behavioral tendencies allowed them to manipulate events without ever exposing their true strength directly and across multiple battlefronts. Planetary defense networks activated hidden weapons platforms, orbital cannons, and stealth capital ships that converge on enemy positions, striking with such precision and timing that even the most seasoned alien commanders could not comprehend the coordination involved, while human tactical officers monitored the flow of battle, making instantaneous adjustments that accounted for every variable, from energy fluctuations and shield harmonics to alien morale and predicted reactions. And as the Dravari fleets continued to falter, the humans executed a series of masterful maneuvers that trapped entire squadrons in gravitational corridors, neutralized entire wings with synchronized attacks, and forced the remaining ships into desperate retreats that led them directly into waiting ambushes, demonstrating that human dominance was not merely technological, but the product of comprehensive understanding, strategic patience, and the ability to manipulate both space and mind. And by the end of the third cycle of combat operations, the Alien Council could no longer deny the scope of human mastery. Their fleet shattered, communications disrupted, and command structure decimated. leaving the Dravari with no choice but to confront the reality that the humans they had ridiculed for centuries were now the architects of their defeat. An unstoppable force whose combination of tactical brilliance, technological superiority, and psychological acuity had successfully outwitted an entire alien armada and begun to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy in a way that would have lasting consequences far beyond the immediate conflict. By the time the Dravari command finally acknowledged the scale of their losses, the realization arrived not as panic, but as a hollow certainty that the war they believed would last days had already been decided, and within the fractured remnants of their armada, confusion replaced obedience as isolated captains began making independent decisions, some attempting retreat, while others sought glory through reckless counterattacks, all of which only deepened their vulnerability to the meticulously layered human strategy that anticipated fragmentation as an inevitable outcome of sustained pressure, and Captain Jonathan Hayes, observing the unfolding patterns from the command station above Mars, calmly redirected human fleets to exploit these fractures, issuing precise instructions that turned alien desperation into predictable movement, while analysts flagged emerging behavioral shifts among Dravari crews that indicated fear-driven responses overriding formal doctrine, something human. Planners had long prepared to exploit, and as the humans tightened their operational net, new assets emerged from beyond periphery of known space. Long-range human fleets that had remained silent and invisible for decades now entered the conflict with calculated timing, their arrival shattering any remaining Dravari belief that humanity's strength had limits, and across contested systems. These reinforcements executed synchronized strikes on alien staging grounds, dismantling repair yards, fuel depots, and command relays with devastating efficiency, while on Earth, President Morrison authorized the activation of the final contingency protocols, measures designed not for survival but for absolute dominance, signaling a strategic transition from defense to irreversible control. And as these orders propagated instantaneously across quantum-linked networks, human forces shifted posture in unison, abandoning reactive engagement in favor of deliberate territorial denial, sealing off entire regions of space and forcing alien vessels into narrowing corridors where every vector was monitored and every escape already calculated. And within these corridors, human weapons platforms deployed adaptive munitions that altered trajectory and output in response to alien countermeasures, rendering traditional defensive tactics useless and forcing alien engineers to confront technologies that evolved faster than they could respond. And as Dravari ships fell silent one by one there, crews began to understand that they were not merely outgunned but comprehensively outthought, facing an opponent who treated warfare as a living system rather than a sequence of battles. And this understanding spread through intercepted communications, whispers of inevitability replacing once confident proclamations of superiority, while human psychological operations intensified, transmitting carefully crafted messages that framed surrender not as humiliation, but as survival subtly, encouraging fractures in alien unity that accelerated collapse from within. And as some alien captains laid down arms, others attempted to rally remaining forces for a final stand near the core of the Armada, unaware that this convergence itself had been anticipated and that human fleets were already maneuvering to encircle location from multiple dimensions, using gravitational lensing and spatial distortion fields to mask approach vectors. And when the final engagement began, it unfolded, less like a battle and more like an execution of long-planned inevitability, with human ships disabling command vessels in the opening moments, severing coordination before resistance could even form, and as alien weapons fired blindly into empty space or harmless decoys, human volleys struck with surgical precision, neutralizing engines, reactors, and communication nodes in rapid succession, while human commanders maintained strict fire discipline, conserving resources and avoiding unnecessary losses, demonstrating that victory was not driven by rage or vengeance but by control. And as the Dravari flagship itself was rendered powerless and forced into a drifting orbit, the surviving members of the Alien Council watched their empire unravel in real time, confronted with the undeniable truth that humanity had not simply adapted to galactic warfare, but had redefined it, turning patience, restraint, and strategic foresight into weapons more powerful than any energy cannon. And as the final Dravari resistance collapsed under the weight of human coordination and resolve, the galaxy began to understand that this conflict was not an anomaly but a revelation, proof that humanity's long silence had been a period of observation and preparation, and that the species once dismissed as chaotic and primitive had mastered the art of outwitting entire civilizations, not through brute force alone, but through an unyielding commitment to understanding their enemies better than they understood themselves. And as the last organized Dravari transmissions faded into static, the humans did not celebrate, but instead consolidated, secured, and stabilized the contested regions, already planning for the consequences of victory, aware that the true measure of power lay not in destruction, but in what followed. And with the Armada broken and its leadership exposed, the galaxy stood on the brink of a new era, one shaped by the unmistakable lesson that humanity, once underestimated, had not only survived confrontation with a superior force, but had decisively outwitted it, leaving no doubt that the balance of power had shifted permanently. In the quiet that followed the collapse of organized Dravari resistance, the galaxy itself seemed to hesitate, as if uncertain how to respond to the sudden absence of a power that had dominated interstellar politics for generations. And within that silence, humanity moved with deliberate calm, securing contested systems, stabilizing trade routes, and establishing temporary governance structures that prevented chaos from spreading beyond the immediate war zone, while Captain Jonathan Hayes coordinated with diplomatic and military leaders to ensure that every liberated region understood that human intervention was not conquest for its own sake, but enforcement of a new strategic reality where unchecked arrogance would no longer be tolerated. And as human fleets transitioned from combat posture to control operations, alien observers from neutral civilizations transmitted stunned reports back to their homeworlds, describing a species that had dismantled a superior armada not through reckless aggression, but through calculated patience, discipline, and almost unsettling level of foresight. And within human command centers, analysts began dissecting the conflict in real time, identifying lessons learned, refining doctrines, and preparing contingencies for reactions from other galactic powers who would inevitably test humanity's resolve. While on the shattered remains of Dravari command stations, human boarding teams encountered alien officers whose confidence had been replaced by disbelief. Their questions no longer focused on defeat, but on how humanity had hidden its true strength for so long, and these encounters reinforced a truth long understood by human strategists, that secrecy, restraint, and preparation were not signs of weakness, but tools that allowed survival in a hostile universe. And as reconstruction efforts began across affected systems, human engineers worked alongside local populations to restore infrastructure, repair habitats, and reactivate trade corridors, demonstrating that humanity's approach to power extended beyond warfare into stewardship, a concept that further unsettled alien civilizations accustomed to domination through fear alone, and in diplomatic channels that had once dismissed human envoys as irrelevant. Urgent requests for dialogue now flowed in, with representatives from multiple species seeking assurances, alliances, and understanding of the principles that guided human action, while President Daniel Morrison addressed the galaxy through a carefully broadcast statement, his words measured and direct, explaining that humanity had not sought war, but would never again accept condescension, coercion, or extermination as the price of coexistence. And this message, stripped of theatrics and threats, carried more weight than any show of force, because it was backed by undeniable proof, and within the remnants of Dravari society, internal reckoning began as surviving leaders confronted the cultural arrogance that had led them to underestimate humanity, sparking debates that would reshape their civilization for generations, while human intelligence monitored these developments closely, aware that defeat often bred desperation as much as reflection, and as weeks passed, the immediate violence faded, replaced by a complex web of negotiations, security arrangements, and quiet power shifts that signaled the emergence of humanity as a central stabilizing force in galactic affairs. And although the war had ended, its psychological impact continued to ripple outward, altering how species evaluated threats, alliances, and the cost of arrogance, while human commanders remained vigilant, knowing that the galaxy was watching not just what humanity had done, but what it would choose to do next. And in that watchful silence, one truth had become impossible to ignore, that the species once dismissed as chaotic and insignificant had proven itself capable of outthinking, outmaneuvering, and ultimately redefining interstellar power, not through endless conquest, but through the disciplined application of intelligence, restraint, and resolve, and as fleets held position across key systems and humanity consolidated its influence without spectacle, the lesson of the conflict settled into collective memory that humanity had not merely defeated an alien armada, it had demonstrated that the greatest weapon in the universe was the ability to prepare patiently, strike decisively, and stop exactly when the objective had been achieved, leaving the galaxy to adjust to a future shaped by a species that had mastered not only war, but control. As the long shadow of the conflict settled across the galaxy, reactions unfolded in layers, subtle at first and then unmistakable, as governments that had once aligned themselves behind the Dravari quietly revised doctrines, budgets, and assumptions, while human diplomats moved through these shifting currents with deliberate restraint, refusing triumphal displays and instead emphasizing stability, predictability, and mutual survival. And this approach unsettled many alien leaders more than open conquest ever could, because it revealed that humanity understood power not as domination, but as leverage carefully applied and carefully withheld. And within the United Earth Command structure, Captain Jonathan Hayes participated in closed strategic reviews that examined not only how the Armada had been dismantled, but how close the galaxy itself had come to cascading war, with analysts concluding that the greatest human advantage had not been superior weapons, but the refusal to react emotionally to provocation, a discipline that allowed planning to unfold over years rather than moments. And as these conclusions circulated through allied channels, human advisors were quietly requested by smaller civilizations seeking guidance on defense, intelligence integration, and long-term deterrence, requests that humanity accepted selectively, ensuring that no single bloc could ever again dominate the galaxy unchecked, while in Dravari space. The consequences of defeat continued to reshape society as former military elites lost authority and civilian councils gained influence. Their debates now centered on how cultural arrogance had blinded them to human capability, and intercepted communications revealed a recurring theme of disbelief that humans had chosen not to annihilate them when given the chance, a restraint that forced the Dravari to confront the moral dimension of power for the first time in their recorded history. And on Earth, public awareness of the war remained carefully managed, with leaders explaining that humanity's survival depended on unity, patience, and continued preparation rather than celebration, reinforcing the idea that victory was a responsibility rather than an endpoint. And as shipyards expanded, research initiatives accelerated, and training programs evolved based on combat data, humanity continued to refine systems that had already proven decisive, not out of fear, but out of understanding that complacency was the one failure. No civilization survived twice. And throughout neutral systems, observers recorded profound shift in galactic behavior as expansionist posture softened, diplomatic channels multiplied, and once dismissed treaties were suddenly treated with urgency, all driven by the shared realization that humanity had introduced a new constant into galactic calculations, a species that did not rush to war but always arrived prepared. And as months passed, the myth of human unpredictability gave way to a more unsettling truth, that humans were predictable only in their insistence on preparation, cooperation among themselves, and absolute resolve when pushed beyond tolerance. And in strategic academies across the stars, the conflict was studied not as a battle, but as a case study in systemic collapse triggered by arrogance, with instructors pointing to how every Dravari assumption had been anticipated, measured, and exploited by humans who understood that enemies often defeated themselves when given enough confidence. And within human leadership, discussions turned toward the long future, toward how to prevent another armada from ever forming under similar delusions, with consensus forming around transparency backed by capability, a balance that discouraged aggression without provoking fear-driven alliances. And as Captain Hayes looked out over the slowly stabilizing map of human space, he understood that the true test of humanity had only begun, not in war, but in peace, in proving that a species capable of outwitting an entire alien armada could also restrain itself from becoming the very threat it had dismantled. And across the galaxy, that understanding took root slowly but firmly, that humanity was no longer an unknown variable or a convenient target, but defining presence whose actions had reshaped expectations, rewritten strategy, and permanently altered the meaning of underestimation. In the years that followed the defeat of the Dravari Armada, the galaxy adjusted not through sudden upheaval, but through quiet recalibration, as trade routes stabilized under new security frameworks, Border disputes dissolved into negotiations rather than conflict, and the once distant presence of humanity became a central reference point in every strategic discussion held among the stars. While human fleets maintained a steady but restrained posture across key systems, visible enough to deter aggression yet measured enough to avoid provocation. And within this balance, humanity demonstrated that its greatest strength lay not in conquest, but in the disciplined control of overwhelming capability. And as alien civilizations slowly accepted this reality, historical records were revised, myths dismantled, and doctrines rewritten to reflect the truth that the humans they had once dismissed were neither reckless nor fragile, but deliberate, unified, and relentless when forced to act. And on Earth, President Daniel Morrison addressed the planetary assembly with a message that echoed far beyond human space, stating plainly that humanity had no desire to rule the galaxy, but would never again accept a universe governed by arrogance, threat, or extinction. And these words carried authority not because they were loud, but because they were proven, and within Dravari society, a generational reckoning unfolded as scholars, civilians, and surviving officers confronted the cultural failures that had led them to underestimate a patient adversary, sparking reforms that dismantled long-standing hierarchies and replaced them with systems built on caution, inquiry, and respect for the unknown. And as former enemies slowly re-entered diplomatic channels, they did so with humility rather than defiance, recognizing that survival now depended on cooperation rather than dominance. While human intelligence quietly monitored these developments, aware that vigilance was the price of peace. And as time passed, the war itself became a lesson taught in academies across countless worlds, not as a tale of destruction, but as a warning about the danger of assumptions, with instructors emphasizing that the Dravari had not been defeated by superior firepower alone, but by their inability to imagine that a species could hide its strength behind restraint. And among humans, the conflict settled into collective memory as a reminder of unity, preparation, and the cost of complacency, shaping generations who understood that peace was maintained not by hope, but by readiness tempered with judgment. And as Captain Jonathan Hayes retired from command, he reflected not on battles won, but on wars prevented, knowing that the true success of humanity's strategy lay in the silence that followed, the absence of armadas gathering in hostile space, the quiet acknowledgement across the galaxy that some forces were better left untested. And in that silence, the final truth became undeniable that humanity had not merely outwitted an entire alien armada, it had redefined the rules of survival among the stars, proving that the most dangerous species was not the loudest or the strongest, but the one that observed patiently, planned relentlessly, and acted decisively only when there was no other choice. And with that understanding etched into the consciousness of the galaxy, the era of underestimating humanity came to an end, replaced by a future shaped by respect, caution, and the enduring knowledge that some mistakes could only be made once.